Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. The creamy envelope, a stark contrast to Annabelle's meticulously cared-for hands, proclaimed its importance with a Philadelphia law firm's letterhead, unfamiliar to her. Curiosity piqued, she used her mother's antique letter opener, a relic deemed necessary even for the most trivial correspondence, to slice it open. The words blurred momentarily. Estate of Silas M.C. Kinley, intestate sole beneficiary Annabelle Hartley. Silas M.C. Kinley? The name unearthed a dim, almost forgotten recollection of a stern, estranged uncle who had disappeared westward decades prior, a societal outlier lost to the burgeoning frontier. He'd been a whispered family secret, a cautionary figure of a life considered misspent. Annabelle settled back against the plush velvet of her chaise, the missive trembling slightly. Uncle Silas? Gone? And she, improbably, his only heir. It seemed preposterous. The document itemized the bequest: M.C. Kinley Ranch, a property with little imagination used in its naming, nestled somewhere in the Montana wilderness. Acreage, animals, buildings, the whole kit and caboodle, as the attorney phrased it with surprising informality. Annabelle, whose most daring excursion involved a promenade in Rittenhouse Square, was now a ranch owner. She scanned the page again, seeking an out, an error that would gracefully return her to her predictable existence. But the pronouncement remained, unequivocal in its legal jargon. She pictured boundless expanses, parched terrain, and cows. It was a realm light years removed from afternoon teas and philanthropic soirees. The news detonated at the Hartley family dinner that evening. Her mother, for whom crossing the Delaware constituted a major expedition, nearly choked on a spear of asparagus. "Montana? Annabelle, darling, are you quite well? This has to be some sort of mistake." Her father, a composed banker who prized stability above all, scowled faintly. "A ranch? Silas always was unconventional. But land holds value. We'll have legal counsel investigate. Likely worthless regardless." Her brother Charles, ever alert to opportunity, interjected. "Perhaps a sale is in order. Consider the investment possibilities. We could rebrand it into a retreat. The M.C. Kinley Wellness Oasis. Picture it. Sunrise salutations on the plains. Pressed kale juice." Annabelle tuned out his chatter, the image of yoga practitioners striking discordant poses against the raw landscape flashing across her mind. "I intend to go," she announced, the declaration startling even her. Every gaze swung toward her, disbelief etched in their features. "Go? Annabelle, surely you jest," her mother exclaimed, clutching her pearls with dramatic flair. "Montana! It's uncivilized. You'll be at the mercy of marauders. Or worse, it'll wreak havoc on your complexion." "Mother, please," Annabelle sighed, massaging the bridge of her nose. "I doubt there are many marauders left to do any marauding, and I'm quite certain a sufficiently high SPF will mitigate any complexion issues. But why, dearest? What possesses you to entertain such a fanciful notion?" Genuine puzzlement colored her mother's tone. Annabelle had always been the compliant daughter, the one who adhered to expectations, who married the suitable man before he proved spectacularly unfit. This sudden show of independence was entirely uncharacteristic. Annabelle surveyed her family, their faces conveying a mixture of concern and thinly veiled condescension. They perceived her as fragile, incompetent, a hothouse bloom requiring constant shielding. Perhaps they were right. But a rebellious impulse had taken root, nourished by the unexpected inheritance and the memory of a man who had dared to escape the gilded cage of Philadelphia society. "I need to see it with my own eyes," she replied, her voice firmer this time. "I need to understand him. And perhaps, I need to understand myself a little better, too." Her father cleared his throat, a sound like gravel shifting. "It's a perilous region, Annabelle. Unpredictable. You lack the skills to manage that." "Then I'll acquire them," she countered, a glint of defiance igniting in her eyes. "I'll engage someone, a local, someone familiar with the territory." Charles snorted derisively. "A wrangler, you mean? Envision it, Annabelle, you, surrounded by ruffians and livestock. Utterly ludicrous." "Perhaps," she said, a faint smile gracing her lips. "But I find myself weary of predictability." The subsequent days dissolved into a flurry of preparations. Annabelle, with the aid of her steadfast housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, commenced a ruthless edit of her wardrobe. The silk gowns and delicate footwear vanished, yielding to durable trousers, serviceable boots, and a surprisingly flattering leather jacket unearthed from her deceased grandfather's chest. She devoured books on Montana, immersing herself in maps and descriptions of the terrain. She even attempted a few elementary cowboy phrases, much to Mrs. Henderson's amusement. The more she absorbed, the more she realized the vastness of her ignorance. Montana represented a world of expansive horizons, craggy peaks, and a spirit of autonomy she had only encountered in literature. It was a world far removed from the manicured gardens and hushed parlors of Philadelphia. She contacted the lawyer again, requesting recommendations for local guides. He seemed taken aback by her resolve but pledged to make inquiries. He cautioned her about the dangers of the area, the potential for confrontation, the volatile climate, but Annabelle remained resolute. One evening, as she sat by the hearth, rereading a particularly evocative passage about the Montana landscape, a surge of doubt engulfed her. What was she contemplating? She was a creature of the city, a society woman, a person who had never spent a night alone under open skies. Was she truly equipped to manage a ranch, to confront the challenges that awaited? She glanced around her, absorbing the familiar comforts of her environment, the silk drapes, the heirloom furnishings, the ancestral portraits observing her from the walls. This was her sphere, the world she had always inhabited. Was she genuinely prepared to abandon it all, to risk everything for a destination she had never seen, for a man she scarcely remembered? But then she recalled Uncle Silas, the family rebel who had dared to spurn expectations, who had chosen a life of liberty and adventure over the constricting pressures of high society, and she considered herself confined within a luxurious cage of her own construction, longing for something deeper, something authentic. The trepidation persisted, a frigid weight in her stomach, but beneath it, a nascent thrill, a glimmer of hope, began to bloom. She closed her eyes, conjuring the boundless plains of Montana, the feel of wind against her skin, the warmth of the sun on her face. It was a calculated risk, a leap of faith, but it was a risk she was prepared to undertake. She opened her eyes, her determination crystallized. She would journey to Montana. She would confront whatever trials lay in wait. She would claim her inheritance, not merely the land and the livestock, but the opportunity to reinvent herself, to forge her own course in the wild and untamed West. She rose from her seat, a newfound resolve hardening her expression. The East Coast may have shaped her, but the West was poised to test her mettle. A cowboy's reluctance, the bat-wing doors of the Rusty Spur saloon swung inward with a groan, momentarily silencing the boisterous chatter. Josiah, a man whose belly strained against his checkered shirt, waddled toward Grayson, who was nursing a whiskey in a darkened corner. "Grayson, got a proposition for you." Grayson looked up slowly, his eyes, the color of weathered steel, narrowed in suspicion. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, the amber liquid catching the dim light. "Josiah, what kind of proposition?" "It's about Silas Hartley's ranch," Josiah began, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. "You know he left it to some niece back east?" Grayson grunted, non-committal. He knew Silas, knew the man's solitary ways and his love for the land. The idea of some pampered city woman inheriting it rankled him. "Heard something about that." "Well, she's here," Josiah continued, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "In Philadelphia, about to come all the way out here. Needs someone to guide her to the ranch, someone reliable." He puffed out his chest, trying to appear more imposing than he actually was. "Folks thought you were the man for the job." Grayson's jaw tightened. "Guide her? Across that terrain? That's Comanche territory, Josiah. Not some Sunday picnic." I know," Josiah said, holding up his hands placatingly. "That's why we need someone like you. Someone who knows the land, knows the dangers." He leaned closer, his voice a near whisper. "She's offering good money, Grayson. Enough to set you up for a while." Grayson remained silent, his gaze fixed on the swirling liquid in his glass. He wasn't motivated by money. He was motivated by a deep, abiding respect for the land and a fierce loyalty to those he considered his own. This Eastern woman, this Annabelle Hartley, was an outsider, a disruption. "What makes you think I'm interested in babysitting some greenhorn city girl?" "Because you're the best we've got, Grayson." A new voice boomed from behind Josiah. It was Caleb, the town's blacksmith, a man built like an anvil. "And because Silas would have wanted someone he trusted to look after his land." Grayson's eyes flashed. "Don't you dare presume to know what Silas would have wanted." Caleb held his ground, his gaze unwavering. "He trusted you, Grayson. We all do. This ain't just about some woman inheriting a ranch. It's about protecting Silas's legacy, making sure his land doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Grayson knew they were right. He knew the dangers that lurked in those hills, the outlaws, and the unforgiving elements. He also knew that Annabelle Hartley, whoever she was woefully unprepared for what awaited her. He imagined her in delicate silks and impractical shoes, utterly helpless against the harsh realities of the West. The image was almost comical, but beneath the amusement was a flicker of something else, a sense of responsibility. "And what makes you so sure she's going to sell it off to the first bidder?" Grayson asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "That's the other thing," Josiah said, his eyes gleaming. "Word is, she's planning on running it herself." Grayson snorted. "A woman like that, running a ranch? That'll be the day." "Maybe," Caleb said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Or maybe she'll surprise us all. Either way, she needs someone to get her there safe. Someone who knows the land." Grayson fell silent again, wrestling with his conscience. He could refuse, let someone else take the job. But he knew in his heart that no one else would protect her, or Silas's land, the way he would. He saw visions of Silas working the land, sweat dripping from his brow as he toiled to make something of nothing. The memory cemented his decision. He slammed his glass down on the counter, the sound echoing through the saloon. "All right," he said, his voice gravelly. "I'll do it." Josiah and Caleb exchanged relieved glances. "Thank you, Grayson," Josiah said, extending a hand. "You won't regret this." Grayson ignored the outstretched hand. "Don't thank me yet. I'm doing this for Silas, not for her. And she better understand that this ain't going to be no pleasure trip. She'll do as I say, when I say, or she can turn right around and go back where she came from." "Understood," Josiah said quickly, his enthusiasm slightly dampened by Grayson's grim demeanor. "She's arriving in town tomorrow. Train should be in around noon." Grayson nodded curtly. "I'll be there." He tossed a few coins on the counter to cover his drink and strode toward the doors, his spurs clicking on the wooden floor. As he pushed through the batwings, he glanced back at Josiah and Caleb. "Tell her to pack light. And tell her to leave her fancy dresses at home. She won't be needing them where we're going." Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty street. Grayson mounted his horse, a sturdy Appaloosa named Shadow, and turned toward the open range. He knew this journey would be more than just a guide job. It would be a test of wills, a clash of cultures, and a challenge to everything he thought he knew about the world. He just hoped he wouldn't regret his decision. He had a feeling this Annabelle Hartley was going to be trouble. And trouble he'd always avoided. But now, trouble was riding right towards him. East meets west, the stagecoach lurched to a halt, throwing dust devils into the already stifling air. Annabelle Hartley stepped down, smoothing the wrinkles from her emerald green traveling dress, a garment utterly inappropriate for the baked earth of Redemption, Arizona. The town, a collection of sun-bleached buildings clinging to the edge of the desert, seemed to stare back at her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. It smelled of horses, wood smoke, and something indefinably wild. A gaggle of children pointed and whispered. A woman with calloused hands and a weary smile offered a hesitant nod. Men leaned against the saloon's porch, their eyes narrowed beneath the brims of their hats. This was not Fifth Avenue. "Miss Hartley?" A voice, rough as granite, cut through the silence. Annabelle turned, her gaze meeting a pair of eyes the color of a stormy sky. Grayson Pike. He stood a head taller than her, his shoulders broad beneath a worn leather vest, his face etched with the harsh lines of a life lived outdoors. He didn't offer a smile, or even a polite greeting. Just a assessing stare that made her feel like a specimen under glass. "Mr. Pike," she replied, her voice a carefully modulated echo of East Coast decorum. "I presume?" He nodded curtly. "Got your telegram. Expected you'd be different." Different. The word hung in the air, laden with unspoken judgment. Annabelle straightened her spine. "Different how, Mr. Pike?" He hitched a thumb towards her dress. "Wouldn't expect to see that much green this side of the Mississippi. Or those fancy shoes." He gestured to her delicate leather boots, already coated in dust. "This ain't a tea party, Miss Hartley." "I am perfectly aware of that, Mr. Pike," she retorted, her chin lifting a fraction. "And I assure you, I am more than capable of adapting to different circumstances." He snorted, a sound that held more than a hint of disbelief. "We'll see about that. Got a wagon waiting. Best get your things." The wagon was utilitarian, its wooden frame weathered and scarred. Annabelle's trunks, filled with silks and linens and the accoutrements of a refined life, looked absurd strapped to its back. Grayson hoisted them up with ease, his movements economical and strong. "Where are we headed?" she asked, trying to ignore the curious stares of the townsfolk. "Hartley Ranch," he replied, his voice devoid of inflection. 3 days' ride. 3 days. Annabelle swallowed hard. She had envisioned a comfortable journey, perhaps a few nights in decent hotels. This was something else entirely. "I trust you have made adequate preparations for the journey?" she asked, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Adequate enough," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Got supplies, water, and a rifle. That's about all you need out here." He didn't mention the dangers, the potential for bandits, the unforgiving landscape, but Annabelle saw it in his eyes, a silent warning that this land demanded respect and offered little mercy. That evening, after a meager supper of beans and jerky prepared by Grayson over a crackling fire, Annabelle sat beside the wagon, sketching in her journal. The desert night was a canvas of indigo and silver, the stars blazing with an intensity she had never witnessed in the smog-choked skies of New York. Grayson sat across the fire, cleaning his rifle. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. "Why did you agree to do this, Mr. Pike?" she asked, finally breaking the stillness. He paused, his eyes meeting hers across the flames. "Your Uncle Silas was a good man. He helped this town when it was nothing but a collection of tents. I owe him. And you believe guiding me is repaying that debt?" He shrugged. "He asked me to look after his land. Figured he wouldn't want it falling into the hands of some city slicker who'd sell it off for a quick buck." His words stung, but Annabelle refused to show it. "I have no intention of selling the ranch, Mr. Pike. I intend to run it." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Run it? You?" "Yes, me," she said, her voice firm. "I understand I have much to learn, but I am a quick study." He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Out here, Miss Hartley, book learning ain't worth a damn. It's about grit and survival, and I ain't seen much of either in you yet." The challenge was laid bare. Annabelle met his gaze, her own hardening. "Then perhaps it's time you did, Mr. Pike." The next morning, Grayson handed Annabelle a pair of worn leather gloves and a wide-brimmed hat. "Gonna need these," he said, his voice gruff. "And lose the dress. Got some trousers and a shirt in the wagon. They'll fit 'ee well enough." Annabelle hesitated, her eyes flicking to the emerald-green fabric she had so carefully chosen. It represented her old life, a life of privilege and ease. But that life was gone now, replaced by the harsh reality of the West. With a sigh, she turned and disappeared behind the wagon. When she emerged, she was almost unrecognizable. The trousers were too big, the shirt too loose, but the transformation was undeniable. The city lady was gone, replaced by something else. Grayson's expression didn't change, but Annabelle saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a hint of respect perhaps. "Let's ride," he said, mounting his horse. Annabelle climbed onto the wagon, the reins heavy in her gloved hands. The sun beat down, the dust swirled, and the vast expanse of the desert stretched before them, an endless horizon of challenge and uncertainty. As the wagon lurched forward, Annabelle Hartley took a deep breath, the scent of sagebrush and dust filling her lungs. East had met West, and the journey had truly begun. The stage was set, and the players were ready to see what the next act would bring, whether it was redemption, ruin, or something in between. Across the river of doubt, the Arizona sun, a blazing disk in the pale sky, offered scant warmth against the biting air. Annabelle halted at the edge of the slick bank, her attention riveted to the turbulent torrent before them. The river, engorged by recent deluges, thundered like a roused behemoth, its muddy surface a frenzied ballet of froth and flotsam. Grayson Pike, his weathered face a mask of grim resolve, assessed their predicament. "The Verd," he declared, his voice a low rumble against the aquatic roar. Usually tamer, but it's passable. Just. Annabelle's swallow felt like trying to dislodge a stone. Just passable did little to quell her unease. Her carefully tailored riding skirt, now stained with grime, felt like a lead weight, a constant reminder of Newport's distant civility. And should it prove impassable? She ventured, a tremor lacing her tone. Grayson's shrug offered a bleak commentary on the land's unforgiving nature. We wait, or detour, both bleed time. He turned to Paint, his Appaloosa, and loosened the saddle girth. We ride. You stay close. Cling tight. A sudden intake of breath caught in Annabelle's throat. She had ridden before, yes, at exclusive stables where instructors fussed over her posture and chided her grip. This, however, was a different beast altogether. Raw, untamed, terrifying. Mr. Pike, aye. Perhaps prudence dictates we wait. Grayson stilled, his gaze sharp, and Annabelle felt stripped bare, her carefully cultivated composure laid to waste. Bandits won't hold their fire, Miss Hartley. The ranch isn't going to magically defend itself. That land demands a price. Best start paying. His words stung, yet ignited a spark of defiance. He saw her as frail, an indulged dilettante unfit for hardship. She would disabuse him of that notion. Very well, she responded, her voice firmer despite the trembling of her hands as she grasped Belle's reins. Let us navigate your just possible river. He offered no reply, but a flicker of surprise sparked in his eyes before his impassive facade settled back into place. Leading Paint into the frothing water, the horse snorted, muscles bunching against the surge. Annabelle followed, Belle voicing her displeasure with each hesitant step. An icy shock jolted through her as the water climbed her boots. Midway, the river turned vicious, the current a relentless hand tugging at Belle's legs, threatening to unseat her. Annabelle gripped the reins, knuckles bone-white, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. Belle emitted a panicked whinny, dancing nervously. Easy, girl, Annabelle soothed, her voice strained. Easy. A sudden wave crashed against Belle, throwing her off kilter. Annabelle gasped, losing purchase on the slick reins. Slipping, she felt the icy rush engulf her, the river's roar deafening. Instinct prevailed. Kicking, she fought the undertow, clawing for purchase. Futile, she was going down. Then, a vise-like grip cinched around her waist, hauling her back into the saddle. Grayson, his face etched with worry, held her firm, his body a bulwark against the flood. Hold on, he bellowed, his voice raw but steady. Don't release. Annabelle clung to him, fear briefly overcome by gratitude's sudden bloom. Burying her face against his back, she inhaled the aroma of leather, sweat, and something primal, echoing the very terrain around them. Together, they battled the remaining stretch, the horses straining, each step a victory. Reaching the far bank, they collapsed over, onto the mud, breathless and quivering. Annabelle slid off Belle, her legs unsteady. Catching her breath, the river's thunder slowly fading, she turned to Grayson, who was already examining Paint, his movements precise. Thank you, she whispered. You pulled me out. A fleeting glance, unreadable. You held your own, he said, his tone devoid of inflection. Most pampered gals would have dissolved into hysterics. Not quite praise, but something nonetheless. Perhaps a sliver of respect? Unsure, Annabelle knew only one thing. She had faced the baptism of the Verde and emerged, bruised but unbroken. on the other side. And in that moment, a tentative hope flickered. Perhaps she could endure this trial after all. As they prepared to press on, she sensed Grayson's gaze lingering, a trace of curiosity within its depths. The river, in testing her mettle, had subtly shifted the dynamics between them. The taciturn cowboy was glimpsing something more than a fragile heiress, and Annabelle, in turn, was beginning to glimpse the man beneath the hardened shell. The destination was still Guar, distant, but the treacherous crossing had forged a thread, a frail, unexpected cord woven in the looms of peril and survival. Stories under the stars, the river's thunder had softened to a sibilant murmur as the sun bled crimson and violet across the saw-toothed horizon. Annabelle, still, chilled and unnerved, observed Grayson's practiced movements as he compiled a stack of kindling. His quiet capability was both daunting and, strangely, reassuring. The air, sharp and keen, held the tang of evergreens and moist earth. A match flared against stone, briefly illuminating his sculpted features before igniting the pyre, which crackled eagerly, its tendrils reaching for the encroaching dark. Sparks pirouetted like golden sprites against the gloom. "Supper's humble tonight," Grayson rumbled, retrieving a battered pot from his saddlebag. "Beans, and whatever I managed to snare. City palates, Miss Hartley, might find it underwhelming." Annabelle settled onto a fallen trunk, drawing her shawl tighter. "Annabelle, please. And simpler meals are hardly foreign to me. Though I admit, my hunting prowess peaks with perusing a menu." He grunted, sluicing water from his canteen into the pot. "City life. Figures." He left the thought unfinished, yet she felt the weight of his unspoken judgment. Silence descended, broken only by the fire's lively chatter and the crickets' evening chorus. An urge to bridge the widening divide rose within Annabelle. "My life in Dublin, Philadelphia," she began, then hesitated, unsure how to depict it without sounding offensively pampered. It was curated, predictable. Balls, soirees, tea with ladies dissecting scandals, opera, theater every moment choreographed, controlled. Grayson prodded the simmering beans with a twig, his gaze fixed on the pot. "Sounds like a cage." At times, it felt like one, Annabelle confessed, surprised by her candor. There was a certain hollowness. "Expectations. Obligations I never quite belonged." He finally looked up, his eyes, the color of gunmetal, locking with hers. "So, what lures a socialite to Montana's hinterlands?" "Uncle Theodore," she replied, a shadow darkening her tone. "He was an anomaly in our family. A maverick who came west and never looked back. He filled my head with stories. Wild chronicles of this land. I suspected he wanted me to see something beyond the gilded bars." Grayson inclined his head slowly, as if privy to unuttered sentiments. "And now you're here to inherit his ranch?" "I intend to try," she declared, lifting her chin with newfound resolve. "I know I have much to learn, but I'm not afraid of honest labor." A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. "We'll see about that. This lamb spares no one, Miss Annabelle," as the shadows deepened. Grayson portioned the beans into dented tinware. They ate in contemplative quiet, the basic fare surprisingly satisfying after the day's travails. "What about you, Grayson?" Annabelle inquired, piercing the silence. "What drew you to this unforgiving terrain?" He hesitated, his expression hardening. "This is my home, always has been." He stirred the fire, sending up showers of sparks. Pa was a prospector, forever chasing gold's elusive promise. Never struck it rich, but he loved this land. He taught me to respect it, to weather it. "And your mother? And your mother?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She died young. Smallpox. It claimed many back then. Annabelle flinched inwardly. I'm sorry. He shrugged it off. It was long ago. This life offers little space for sentimentality. He paused, then, unexpectedly, added, Pa told stories around the campfire, too. Tales of mountain men, Indian clashes, outlaws' tales absent from books. Tell me one, Annabelle pressed, leaning forward, her eyes bright with anticipation. Grayson scrutinized her, as though assessing the wisdom of offering a glimpse into his world. He sighed finally, and began. His voice, raw and resonant, shifted subtly as he recounted the saga of a lone trapper who outwitted a war party of Crow, relying solely on cunning and the lay of the land. He spoke of the man's grit, his resourcefulness, his profound connection to the wilderness. Annabelle listened, spellbound, the firelight dancing in her eyes. It was a universe removed from the decorous exchanges she was used to, a sphere of peril, hardship, and untamed grandeur. He spun another yarn, this one detailing a stagecoach heist gone sideways, a narrative of treachery and brutality that sent a shiver down Annabelle's spine despite the fire's warmth. Grayson didn't romanticize the savagery, he simply presented it as a bleak reality of life in the West. As he spoke, Annabelle detected a flicker in his gaze, a blend of melancholy, fatigue, and a deeply ingrained pride. She began to perceive him not merely as a rugged frontiersman, but as a man sculpted by the very earth beneath their feet, a man with his own history etched into his being. When he concluded, quiet descended once more, but it felt different this time, less forced, more intimate. "Thank you," Annabelle murmured softly. Those were powerful narratives. Grayson merely nodded, his gaze intent on the glowing embers. He remained silent, yet Annabelle sensed a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a slight breach in his defenses. The stars, dazzling and myriad, glittered overhead. An immense tapestry of light unfurled across the ebony sky. Annabelle had never witnessed such a celestial display, untainted by urban haze. "It's breathtaking," she breathed, gazing upward. Grayson followed her gaze. "Yeah," he assented quietly. "It is." They lingered in comfortable silence for a long while, lost in the vastness of the night sky. Annabelle felt a peace she hadn't known in years, a sense of belonging, however fleeting, in this wild, unforgiving place. As the fire dwindled, casting elongated, swaying shadows, Grayson unfurled his bedroll near the dying embers. "You can have my jacket," he said, tossing it over to her. "It'll get cold before dawn." Annabelle caught the garment, the coarse wool feeling warm against her skin. It carried the scent of horses, wood smoke, and something else indefinable, a trace of the wild, untamed West. "Thank you," she repeated, her voice barely audible. He simply nodded, turning away. Annabelle watched him for a moment, then wrapped herself in the jacket and settled onto her own bedroll, her gaze fixed on the stars. Sleep came slowly, but when it claimed her, it was deeper and more profound than any she had experienced in Philadelphia. Her dreams were filled with cowboys and desperados, with roaring rivers and star-strewn heavens, with a land both beautiful and brutal, and with a man as inseparable from that land as the mountains themselves. Ambush! The familiar balm of pine and wood smoke dissolved into the stinging reek of gunpowder. A thunderous blast shattered the morning's tranquility. Annabelle, measuring coffee, gasped and dropped the tin, its metallic clatter lost beneath a second, sharp report. "Ambush!" Grayson's raw bellow cut through the pandemonium. He propelled Annabelle behind the overturned chuck wagon, its stout wheels a flimsy shield. Already he was braced, rifle up, eyes sweeping the tree line. Heart a frantic drum against her ribs, Annabelle glimpsed movement-blurred color, winking steel among the branches. A frigid dread seized her. This was no storybook lark. This was survival. "Stay low!" Grayson snapped, a bullet splintering the bark of a nearby fir. His face was a study in hard-won grit. Who is it?" Annabelle choked out, barely audible. "Callahan's bunch," Grayson returned, reloading swiftly. "Black Bart Callahan. Word was they're headed this way." Black Bart Callahan. The name evoked shadows of depraved men, whispers of stolen fortunes and cold-blooded killings. Annabelle had written them off as tall tales, spun for naive tourists. Now, that legend was trying to end her. Another fusillade slammed into the wagon, punching holes in the wood. Annabelle recoiled, drawing her knees up. Grayson answered with measured fire, his rifle a counterpoint to the ragged volley from the woods. "Handle a gun?" he demanded, urgency tightening his voice. Annabelle hesitated. She'd target practiced on her father's estate, but that was sport, leagues away from this lethal reality. I don't know," she admitted, shame burning her cheeks. Grayson cursed under his breath, then snatched a lever action from the wagon, thrusting it into her hands. "Point, aim, pull. Don't think, just fire." The rifle felt heavy, foreign, a cold extension of her trembling hands. Annabelle swallowed, her throat suddenly parched. She peeked over the wagon's edge, trying to decipher the swirling chaos. Vague figures darted through the trees, faces masked by shadow and kerchiefs. "See that one, by the oak?" Grayson indicated. "Take him down." Annabelle faltered. Could she actually do it? Snuff out a life. Then she saw the steel in Grayson's gaze, the icy terror in her own soul. It was him or them. She raised the rifle, her arms trembling. She focused, narrowing her vision on the figure near the oak. He was taking aim toward their cover. She squeezed. The rifle roared and bucked violently, the recoil bruising her shoulder. The sound reverberated in her ears. The figure by the oak staggered, his rifle clattering to the ground. He grabbed his arm, vanishing behind the thick trunk. Annabelle stared at the weapon, her mind spinning. She had wounded someone. She had actually wounded someone. "Good," Grayson said, his tone surprisingly level. "Now, stay alert. They will be back." The exchange escalated. Bullets zipped perilously close, showering them with dirt and wood chips. Grayson moved with feline grace, his rifle an extension of his very being. A whirlwind of action. He fired, reloaded, barking directions at Annabelle. "Reload," he commanded, tossing her cartridges. Fingers fumbling, numb with fear, Annabelle managed to feed the rifle, each clip a hammer blow against her ribs. "They're flanking us!" Grayson yelled, firing a double shot to the left. "We have to move!" He seized Annabelle's arm, pulling her toward the horses. "Can you ride?" "Yes," she answered. "But—" "No buts," Grayson interrupted. "It's ride or die." He hoisted her onto her mare, then vaulted onto his own Appaloosa, a beast of muscle and fire. "Hold tight." He dug his heels into his horse's flanks, and they exploded from behind the wagon, galloping towards the open range. The outlaws, caught unaware, unleashed a wall of lead. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up gouts of dust. Annabelle clung to the mare's mane, knuckles bone-white. The wind screamed past her ears, blurring her vision. Looking back, she saw the outlaws in hot pursuit. their mounts churning up clouds of dust. "They're gaining!" she screamed, her voice lost in the din of hooves and gunfire. "We need to shake them in the hills," Grayson yelled back. "Hold on." He guided his horse toward a craggy outcrop, urging it into a precarious ascent. Annabelle followed, her mare struggling to keep pace. The terrain was brutal, strewn with loose rock and tenacious brush. They rode flat out, demanding everything from their horses. The outlaws were relentless, their chase unwavering. Annabelle could hear their enraged shouts echoing through the rocky landscape. Reaching the crest of a ridge, Grayson reined in his mount. He scanned the terrain, his features hardening. "We'll dig in here," he announced, dismounting. "They won't expect it." Annabelle slid from her mare, her limbs wobbly. She met Grayson's gaze, a mixture of grimness and determination etched on his face. He was prepared to fight. And so, she realized, was she. The sheltered socialite was gone. She was a survivor now. She was ready to fight for her very existence. Grayson gave her the rifle. "Remember what I told you." Annabelle accepted the weapon, her grip now firm. She gazed at the approaching figures, their faces twisted in hate. The sun flashed on their rifles. "I'm ready," she said, her voice clear and steady. The outlaws charged, their horses a thundering wave. The final conflict had begun. A bullet's whisper, the explosion ripped through the air, a brutal assault on Annabelle's ears. She flinched, bracing for the agonizing sting of a gunshot wound. Instead, a massive weight slammed into her, expelling the air from her lungs in a painful whoosh. Trapped, she struggled against the sudden, pinning force. When she finally dared to peek, Grayson was sprawled atop her, his features twisted in a silent snarl of pain, a spreading darkness staining his jacket at the shoulder. "Grayson," she choked out, her voice constricted by fear. He remained unresponsive, his body a leaden burden. Desperate, she heaved against him, partially dislodging his weight. The sharp, pungent reek of burnt powder stung her nostrils, mingling with the coppery essence of blood. Black Bart's thugs continued their barrage, rounds impacting the rocks with dull thuds nearby. But Annabelle saw only Grayson. A lone moan escaped him, his hand clamped tight on his shoulder. "Stay down, damn it, Annabelle," he grit out, his voice a raw whisper. Defying him, she tore a length from her already shredded skirt. The fine linen gave way easily, a stark contrast to the coarse weave of Grayson's shirt, now saturated crimson. "Hold this," she commanded, pressing the makeshift compress against the wound. His complexion was ashen, his breaths shallow and uneven. The usual inferno in his gaze had dwindled to a weak ember. "Waste of good linen," he mumbled, but he didn't resist. He simply pressed the cloth tighter, his jaw a hard line against the torment. The gunfire seemed to recede, replaced by a singular focus on stemming the flow. She'd never witnessed such a loss, never felt so utterly adrift. Her hands trembled as she worked, memories of her sheltered life in Philadelphia feeling like echoes from a faded dream. This was the unvarnished truth, stark, savage, and terrifyingly present. "We have to move," she stated, her voice regaining a semblance of control. "Can you ride?" Grayson grunted, a sound laced with agony. "Got much choice?" He levered himself up, using a nearby boulder as purchase. Each movement was slow, agonizing, a testament to his suffering. Annabelle assisted him to his feet, surprised by the strength she found within herself. Always considering herself frail, she now discovered unexpected reserves of fortitude born from necessity. They stumbled toward the horses, the animals edgy and agitated. Grayson sucked in a breath as he hauled himself into the saddle, his face a mask of white-hot pain. Annabelle mounted Ginger, her pulse hammering in her ears. She risked a glance back, half expecting to see Blackbart's crew closing in. For now, however, they were spared. They spurred their mounts into a gallop, pushing them to their limits. The landscape became a blur of muted colors, a swirling tapestry of stone, brush, and sky. Annabelle fixated on Grayson, watching his condition deteriorate. The blood loss was evident, his features growing increasingly gaunt. He rode silently, his lips a tight seam, his gaze fixed on some distant point on the horizon. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the heavens in fiery strokes of apricot and lavender, they stumbled upon a small, secluded canyon. A trickle of water snaked through the rocks, offering a precious source. It wasn't much, but it promised sanctuary. "We'll stop here for the night," Annabelle announced, her voice raspy. "We need to tend to that wound." Grayson gave a curt nod, his movements robotic. He dismounted with excruciating slowness, his legs threatening to buckle. Annabelle supported him toward a flat rock near the stream, easing him down with gentle hands. "Let me see," she murmured, her voice softer now, the rigid formality absent. She cautiously peeled back the blood-soaked cloth, revealing a jagged gash. The bullet had ripped through flesh, a hair's breadth from bone. His survival was a miracle. Annabelle gulped, fighting down a rising wave of nausea. She'd never confronted such a gruesome sight. But she couldn't afford weakness. Grayson's life hung in the balance. She cleansed the wound as best she could with the cool stream water, her hands surprisingly steady. Grayson bit down hard, his body coiled with pain. He remained silent, but tiny droplets of sweat glistened on his brow. "I need to get the bullet out," she whispered, her voice thin. Do you have a knife?" Grayson nodded, his eyes squeezed shut. He reached into his boot and produced a well-worn knife with a bone handle. Offering it to her was a silent act of complete faith. Annabelle grasped the knife, her hand trembling almost uncontrollably. She had never attempted surgery, not even on an animal, but she had no choice but to try. She summoned her courage, focusing all her attention on the task before her. "This will hurt," she said, her voice tight with apprehension. "I'm sorry." Grayson's eyes flickered open, locking onto hers. His expression was a complex blend of agony and something else, something profound. "Just do it," he rasped, his voice strained. Annabelle took a steadying breath and began. The following moments were a chaotic storm of pain and intense focus. She worked with surprising speed and purpose, her movements surprisingly deft. Finally, with a shaky sigh, she managed to extract the projectile. Grayson groaned, his body convulsing against the rock. Annabelle re-cleaned the injury, then bound it firmly with another strip torn from her skirt. "That's the best I can do," she said, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "We need to let it heal." Grayson nodded weakly, his eyes closed. He lay still for what felt like an eternity, his breathing shallow and ragged. Then, his eyelids fluttered open, his gaze finding Annabelle's. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You saved my life." Annabelle shook her head. "You saved mine," she countered softly. "You took a bullet for me." Grayson gave a slight shrug, his face carved with suffering. "Someone had to," he replied. "Wouldn't want to lose the prettiest wildflower in the desert." The words were unexpected, a brief flash of vulnerability beneath his hardened exterior. A faint blush warmed Annabelle's cheeks. She averted her gaze, both embarrassed and strangely touched. They remained in silence for a long while, the only sound the gentle babble of the stream. The stars began to prick the inky canvas of the night sky, twinkling with impossible brilliance. Annabelle looked up, captivated by their splendor. She had never truly noticed them before, not in Philadelphia. But here, in the raw wilderness, they seemed brighter, more alive, more significant. She glanced back at Grayson. He had drifted off to sleep, his face pale and drawn. She watched him for a considerable time, her heart swirling with a potent mix of gratitude, respect, and something else entirely. Something she couldn't yet name. She knew that their shared ordeal had forged a connection, a profound bond between them that could never be broken. The bullet's passage had spoken volumes. Stranded, the bitter tang of spent powder still choked the air, laced with the coppery scent of blood. Annabelle, fighting a tremor that threatened to overwhelm her, ripped another strip from her underskirt and pressed it to Grayson's injury. He sucked in a sharp breath, a suppressed growl vibrating in his chest, yet remained otherwise impassive. His stoicism, while maddening, held a certain compelling quality. "Hold still," she ordered, the words edged with more severity than she intended, a consequence of raw nerves and dwindling adrenaline. He shifted minimally, his hawk-like gaze scanning the perimeter of trees. "They're gone, for now." "Gone?" Annabelle echoed, momentarily distracted. "Are you certain?" They wouldn't risk lingering, too exposed. He paused, his voice strained. "See to the horses." A cold fist clenched around Annabelle's insides. She lurched to her feet, propelled by the urgency in Grayson's tone. The animals were thankfully unharmed at their tethers, but a swift inventory revealed the dire reality. Their pack horse, laden with provisions, had vanished. The saddlebags on their own mounts lay gutted, devoid of anything of value. She returned to Grayson, her face ashen. "They took everything," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Food, blankets, medicine, all of it." Grayson unleashed a blistering string of oaths that would have scandalized her grandmother. He struggled to sit upright, wincing sharply. Damn them to perdition! They knew precisely what they were doing. Annabelle knelt beside him, her mind reeling. "What are we to do?" His eyes, sharp as flint, met hers. "We walk." The sun, a malevolent eye in the sky, baked the already parched earth into a furnace. Annabelle's throat felt like a desert, her skin prickled with heat. The delicate linen of her gown, once so fashionable in Philadelphia, now felt like a suffocating trap. She had already relinquished her hat, its wide brim offering scant protection. Grayson, despite his injury, maintained a grueling pace, moving with a relentless resolve, his gaze constantly sweeping the horizon. Annabelle struggled to keep up, her city-bred boots proving woefully inadequate for the rugged terrain. Each step was an agony, a stark reminder of her folly in imagining she could tame this wilderness. "Grayson," she rasped, finally forcing him to halt. I need a respite." He turned, his expression inscrutable. "We have no time for such indulgences, Miss Hartley." I can't continue," she choked out, her voice fracturing. Tears stung her eyes, a blend of pain, exhaustion, and gnawing apprehension. She loathed the weakness that gripped her, the vulnerability she couldn't seem to conquer. He observed her for what felt like an eternity, his gaze lingering on the damp streaks on her face. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he conceded. "Very well. 5 minutes." Annabelle collapsed against a sun-scorched boulder. Though the stone radiated heat, she welcomed its support. She squeezed her eyes shut, attempting to ignore the throbbing in her feet and the hollow ache in her stomach. "There's a creek, maybe 10 miles ahead," Grayson stated, his voice surprisingly tender. "If we reach it, we'll have water. And perhaps I can procure something edible." Annabelle's eyes fluttered open, a spark of hope rekindling within her. 10 miles? Can we manage it? He merely shrugged. "We must." The creek, upon their eventual arrival, proved to be a mere thread of muddy water, barely sufficient to moisten their cracked lips. But it was water, and Annabelle clung to gratitude for that small mercy. Grayson, despite his obvious discomfort, managed to trap a rabbit using improvised snares. It was a meager offering, but it warded off the worst of their hunger. As they huddled by the meager fire, picking at the roasted meat, Annabelle studied Grayson. His features were gaunt and pale, yet his eyes retained their characteristic glint of determination. "Thank you," she murmured. He glanced at her, his expression guarded. "Don't offer thanks prematurely. This ordeal is far from over." "I understand," she said. "But you saved my life. Back there, with those brigands." He shrugged again, brushing aside her appreciation. Any man would have acted similarly. Annabelle harbored doubts. She had witnessed his actions decisive, unwavering, placing himself between her and danger. It transcended mere duty. It was something more profound. "What is the strategy now?" she asked, steering away from dangerous emotional waters. "The strategy," Grayson replied, his focus on the dancing flames, "is to return to redemption." "But how?" "We're without provisions, without mounts. We walk," he reiterated, his tone unwavering. "We trace the creek downstream. Eventually, it will intersect with the main road." "And what time frame are we considering?" He hesitated for a beat. "Several days, possibly longer." Annabelle swallowed thickly. "Days of hardship, with minimal sustenance, in this relentless environment." It seemed an insurmountable task. "We are capable of it," Grayson asserted, as though reading her despairing thoughts. "But we must function as a unit. No further lamentations, no further capitulation. Understood?" Annabelle gazed into his eyes, into their steely fortitude, and an unexpected surge coursed through her. It wasn't merely hope, it was resolve, hardening into something like defiance. She was weary of embodying the pampered debutante, the helpless damsel. She was more than that. She had to be. "I comprehend," she responded, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "I'm prepared." Grayson gave a curt nod, a fleeting spark of something akin to approval flickering in his gaze. "Good, because we are going to require every scrap of grit we possess." The sun, a brutal hammer in the sky, pounded the land into a desolate tableau of dust and fissures. Grayson, fatigue carving lines into his face, indicated barely visible disturbances in the baked earth. "Dear," he croaked, his voice sounded raw. "Book, judging by the spread. Heading west, most likely towards the creek." Annabelle's gaze met only shimmering heat and the confusing texture of the desert floor. "I can't. I don't see anything." A sigh escaped Grayson, like the rustling of skeletal branches. He knelt, a weathered finger tracing the edge of a print. "Feel. Notice how the grains shift, the specific curve. A horse's hoof is different. A coyote's distinct again." He took her hand, guiding her fingers along the indentation. His touch, rough, yet surprisingly tender, sparked a novel awareness in her, wholly separate from tracking. Now, the direction. The deeper impression reveals the point of thrust. See the slight scattering of dust behind it? That tells the tale. He rose, eyes sweeping the horizon. Tracking isn't just sight, it's instinct. Annabelle concentrated, locking onto the subtle clues. She pushed aside the insistent pangs of hunger and the fiery protest of her aching feet. Gradually, painstakingly, a faint trail began to materialize. I think I see it, she breathed, surprise coloring her voice. A bit clearer ahead, near that scrub patch. Grayson nodded, a fleeting smile gracing his lips. Good, you're getting it. He motioned towards a cluster of rocks. Let's aim for that shade. And I need to rest this blasted leg. They found scant refuge beneath the rocky overhang. Grayson leaned against the cool stone, his face ashen. Annabelle rummaged within her reticule, a vestige of a bygone era, now repurposed as a survival kit. Among shattered compacts and broken combs, she unearthed a small leather-bound volume. "What's that?" Grayson inquired, suspicion tightening his features. "My materia medica," Annabelle replied, carefully opening it. "My grandmother taught me about medicinal herbs. I thought it might prove useful." She turned the pages, her fingers caressing faded botanical illustrations. Grayson scoffed. "Flowers won't do us any good out here." "Not flowers," Annabelle corrected, a sharp edge to her tone. "Herbs, and perhaps they will. Yarrow for 4. Stopping blood. Willow bark to dull pain, if we can locate them." She surveyed the vista, searching for a hint of verdancy. "There's nothing but rock and dust," Grayson countered, doubt heavy in his voice. "There's always something," Annabelle insisted, her gaze alighting on a small colony of plants clinging tenaciously to the stony soil. "Look," she indicated low-growing shrubs, with silvery leaves. "Sagebrush, good for cleansing." And her eyes widened. "There, comfrey." She clambered over to the plant, gently touching the bristly leaves. "Knitbone. It encourages repair of broken bones and damaged skin." Her gaze drifted to Grayson's leg, the improvised bandage stained crimson. "It won't fully mend it, but it can ease the discomfort and fend off infection." Grayson watched her, his expression a complex blend of incredulity and reluctant appreciation. "You know about plants." "My grandmother was a botanist," Annabelle explained, carefully gathering the comfrey. She chewed on some leaves before applying them to Grayson's leg. "Crude, I know, but clean." Annabelle meticulously prepared a poultice, crushing the leaves with a rock and combining them with precious drops of water. She applied it to Grayson's wound with surprising confidence. Grayson winced. "Burns like hell." "It's working," Annabelle assured him. "The allantoin stimulates cell regeneration. It will diminish the swelling." She secured the poultice with a strip torn from her petticoat. "Better?" Grayson cautiously tested his ankle. "Slightly. Less throbbing, at least. Still can't bear much weight." "It will take time," Annabelle said, stowing the remaining comfrey in her reticule. "But every bit helps." She regarded him, a newfound resolve hardening her gaze. "Now, about finding water?" Grayson studied her, his gaze lingering on her face. He saw the ingrained dirt, the visible exhaustion, but something else as well. A fortitude, a resilience he had overlooked. "Creeks west," he conceded, his tone less abrasive. "But it's a long track. We'll have to be smart." "Then let's be smart," Annabelle replied, her chin lifting. You navigate. I'll scout for useful flora. Between us, we might just pull through this. Grayson pushed himself up, relying on a makeshift crotch hewn from a branch. He looked at Annabelle, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time. This was no delicate flower destined to wilt. This was a woman adapting, surviving, fighting. And he suspected she had more surprises in store. They resumed their journey, moving slowly and deliberately across the unforgiving terrain. Grayson identified landmarks, tutoring Annabelle in the art of celestial navigation. Annabelle, in turn, pointed out edible plants and potential water sources. Their skills, so dissimilar, so seemingly incompatible, began to interlock, forming a delicate yet potent synergy. As the sun began its descent, splashing the sky with vibrant shades of coral and violet, they discovered a small spring concealed amongst the rocks. The water, cool and pristine, offered sweet relief after agonizing thirst. They drank their fill, invigorating their weary bodies. As they settled in for the night, sharing a meager ration of dried meat Annabelle had salvaged, Grayson looked at Annabelle, a glimmer of what might have been admiration in his eyes. "You're tougher than you appear, Miss Hartley." Annabelle met his gaze, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "And you're not quite the curmudgeon you make yourself out to be, Mr. Pike." A silence descended, heavy with unspoken understanding. They were still leagues from redemption, still facing unknown perils, yet for the first time since the ambush, a spark of hope flickered. They were learning to depend on one another, to confide in one another, to regard each other not as antagonists, but as allies in a desperate struggle. And within that shared trial, a bond was forming, deeper than the sun-baked earth beneath them. Ghost Town Refuge. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of ozone and something else, something ancient and metallic, like rusted iron and forgotten lives. Annabelle pulled her threadbare shawl tighter, the fine wool doing little to ward off the approaching chill. "Smells like rain," she observed, more to break the growing silence than to impart any profound wisdom. Grayson, ever the stoic silhouette against the bruised sky, only grunted in agreement. He scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowed against the gathering gloom. Suddenly, topping a small rise, a cluster of dilapidated structures emerged from the swirling dust. Buildings stood like skeletal remains against the skyline, their windows vacant eyes staring into a past long gone. "What is it?" Annabelle asked, a note of apprehension creeping into her voice. "Ghost Town," Grayson replied, his voice flat. "Used to be a mining settlement, dried up years ago." He nudged his horse forward, the animal's hooves kicking up puffs of ochre dust. "Looks like it might offer some shelter." Hope, fragile as a desert bloom, flickered within Annabelle. Shelter meant respite, a temporary reprieve from the relentless elements. As they rode into the town, a palpable sense of abandonment settled over them. The silence was profound, broken only by the creaking of weathered wood and the mournful sigh of the wind whistling through shattered window panes. A saloon, its swinging doors hanging askew, stood sentinel at the end of the main street. A general store, its sign barely legible, hinted at a time when this place had been a hub of activity. Grayson dismounted in front of what appeared to be the town's former hotel, its facade scarred and peeling. He tested the door, finding it unlocked, or rather unlatched, hanging loosely on its hinges. "This'll do," he said, pushing the door open with a groan. "Better than nothing." The interior was a cavern of shadows and dust. Sunlight filtered weakly through the grimy windows, illuminating motes dancing in the air. The lobby was a wreckage of overturned furniture and decaying wallpaper. A grand staircase, Its railing, broken in places, led to the upper floors, promising only more of the same desolation. Annabelle stepped inside, her nose wrinkling at the musty odor of decay. "Charming," she said, her voice laced with sarcasm. Grayson ignored her remark, his gaze sweeping the room, assessing potential threats and escape routes. "Upstairs is no good. Roof's probably caved in. We'll stay here." He gestured to a relatively intact corner near the boarded-up fireplace. "Make yourself comfortable." Comfort was a relative term, Annabelle thought, surveying their surroundings. She cleared a space on the floor, brushing away layers of dust and debris. The storm was drawing closer, the sky outside darkening with ominous speed. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a deep guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, Grayson busied himself securing the door, wedging a piece of broken chair leg beneath the handle. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and whistling through the cracks in the walls. The ghost town seemed to groan under the assault of the elements, its forgotten inhabitants stirring in their eternal slumber. Annabelle huddled in her corner, shivering despite her layers of clothing. The temperature had plummeted with the arrival of the storm, and a damp chill permeated the air. She watched Grayson as he moved with a quiet efficiency, his movements economical and precise. He was a creature of this harsh landscape, weathered and unyielding, while she felt like a fragile porcelain doll, easily broken by its unforgiving embrace. He caught her gaze, and something flickered in his eyes, a brief moment of what might have been concern. "Cold?" he asked, his voice gruff. "A bit," she admitted, unwilling to reveal the full extent of her discomfort. He walked over to the fireplace and began gathering scraps of wood from the debris scattered around the room. "I'll try to get a fire going," he said, his back to her. "Might take the edge off." Annabelle watched him as he coaxed a flame from the dry tinder, his brow furrowed in concentration. The fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls and throwing a warm glow onto his rugged features. The flickering light softened the harsh lines of his face, revealing a hint of vulnerability beneath his hardened exterior. As the fire grew stronger, the oppressive chill in the room began to dissipate. Annabelle moved closer, drawn to the warmth and the comforting sound of the crackling flames. The storm raged outside, but within the confines of the abandoned hotel, a fragile sense of sanctuary had been established. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the roar of the fire and the relentless pounding of the rain against the windows. The claustrophobic setting seemed to amplify their awareness of each other, the unspoken tension between them thickening with each passing moment. Annabelle found herself stealing glances at Grayson, studying the lines etched around his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he was deep in thought. She wondered about his past, about the experiences that had shaped him into the man he was today. He shifted, his gaze meeting hers. The intensity in his eyes made her heart skip the beat. "What?" he asked, his voice low and husky. Annabelle quickly averted her gaze, her cheeks flushed. "Nothing," she mumbled, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "Justy thinking." He didn't press her, but she could feel his eyes on her, scrutinizing her every move. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged with unspoken emotions. The storm continued to rage outside, mirroring the tempest brewing within the confines of the abandoned hotel and within their hearts. They were trapped, not just by the weather, but by the undeniable connection that had sparked between them, a connection that threatened to unravel the carefully constructed walls they had both erected around their hearts. A kiss in the saloon rain lashed the old saloon, a frenzied percussion mirroring the frantic rhythm of Annabelle's pulse. The air hung heavy with the ghosts of celebrations, past the cloying scent of decay mingling with lingering hops. A lone oil lamp flickered, casting elongated, wavering shadows that transformed the peeling wallpaper into a canvas of ochre and sepia. Grayson had coaxed a reluctant blaze from the potbelly, providing a meager sanctuary against the encroaching cold. Separated by the scarred expanse of the bar, they remained silent, the unspoken tension a live wire strung between them. Annabelle circled the rim of her tin cup, the chill of the metal a stark contrast to the heat rising within her. She chanced a look at Grayson. His features were veiled in shadow, yet she discerned the piercing glint of his eyes, watching her with an intensity that stole her air. He belonged here, as much as the timbers and dust, sculpted by the unforgiving land. However, she had glimpsed beneath that granite facade a hint of shared vulnerability. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice a fragile thread against the tempest's roar. "For everything." Grayson straightened, his movement unhurried. "You'd have done the same." A disbelieving sound escaped Annabelle. "Hardly. I wouldn't have known where to start." He pushed away from the bar, boots quiet on the aged floorboards. Closing the space between them, he halted mere feet away. Firelight danced within the depths of his gaze, illuminating the network of lines etched there, each a mark of a life weathered by hardship. "Don't sell yourself short, Annabelle," he rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." "Really?" she countered, a note of defiance coloring her tone. "Or just too stubborn to concede when I'm out of my depth?" He reached for her, calloused fingertips tracing the curve of her cheek. The touch sparked a jolt of awareness through her, a primal warmth that chased away the chill and ignited her skin. "Perhaps a little of both," he conceded, his gaze searching. "But stubbornness can be a useful trait around here." Her heart hammered a wild tattoo against her ribs, threatening to drown out the storm's fury. She had never experienced such conflicting emotions, a dizzying blend of trepidation and yearning, fragility and fierce desire. Grayson was a world apart from the refined circles she knew, a man forged in the furnace of the West, yet she found herself drawn to him with an irresistible pull. "Grayson," she whispered, barely audible. He inclined his head, his breath ghosting across her skin. "Annabelle." Yearning glances, lingering touches, shared privations, the unspoken simmered, then coalesced into an irresistible brew, demanding a taste. The air thrummed with raw, unspoken need, a force drawing them together. "This is ill-advised," she stammered, her voice trembling. A faint smile played on his lips. "Wisdom doesn't factor into what I'm feeling right now." He framed her face, thumbs gently caressing her cheekbones. His dark, unwavering eyes ensnared her, drowning her in their depths. Logic demanded she retreat, remind him of the chasm separating their lives, but the words dissolved in her throat, lost in the flood of her emotions. "Are you afraid, Annabelle?" he murmured. She swallowed, her gaze locked. "Terrified," she admitted. "Good," he replied, his voice husky with suppressed emotion. "Then you know it's real." And then he kissed her, not the practiced pecks of former admirers, but a raw claiming, a merging that left her breathless and undone. His lips were firm, demanding, his tongue a fiery brand searing her skin and igniting a blaze within. She closed her eyes, yielding, abandoning herself to the intoxicating sensation. He tasted of smoke and wilderness, leather and whiskey, and something intrinsically masculine that stirred a primal response within her. She wound her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss, her fingers tangling in the thick hair at his nape. A soft groan escaped him against her lips, his body taut with barely contained desire. He molded her against him, letting her feel the solid strength of his body, the potency beneath his stoic demeanor. The kiss intensified, becoming more urgent, a desperate craving for connection against a harsh backdrop. Time dissolved the raging storm, the crumbling saloon, the vast gulf between their lives, all faded. Only this remained, this moment, this kiss, this undeniable connection forged between them. Finally, breathless, they broke apart, foreheads touching, eyes locked in shared tumult. Embers of passion still danced in their eyes, reflecting the wild emotions swirling within. "Annabelle," he rasped, voice ragged. Speechless, she could only gaze at him, her heart laid bare. His hand, trembling slightly, reached out, brushing a stray curl from her face. "We shouldn't have done that," he uttered, tinged with regret. "Shouldn't we have?" she whispered. He averted his gaze, a hardness settling over his features, jaw tightening. "It changes things," he stated. "Does it have to?" she pleaded. Turning back, his eyes mirrored her inner turmoil. "Yes," he affirmed, his voice firm. "It does." He retreated, breaking the connection, creating an emptiness that yawned between them. The storm raged on, a fitting soundtrack to the inner tempest. The kiss had shattered a fragile equilibrium, revealing a truth neither could ignore. And now they grappled with the fallout, adrift in uncertainty. With only the dilapidated saloon and the fury of the storm for company. The night was far from over. The outlaws' return, the saloon reeked of stale liquor and damp fabric, a grim counterpoint to the volatile energy that had surged between them. Annabelle's flesh prickled, a delayed reaction to the kiss's raw intensity, leaving her stripped bare yet strangely invigorated. Grayson, his features once again a granite mask, meticulously spun the cylinder of his revolver. "Grayson?" she ventured, her voice thin. He remained fixed on his task. "We have to leave." His words were sharp, all business. Annabelle's fragile hope crumbled. Had that stolen moment been a mistake? A fleeting impulse he already regretted? She banished the thought, clinging to his words. "Leave? Where can we go? The storm hasn't broken." "It doesn't matter. This place is compromised." He indicated the shattered window, the wind a shrieking harpy. "Someone paid us a visit." Following his gaze, Annabelle initially saw only the blizzard swirling dance. Then she spotted them. Faint tracks leading from the saloon, partially filled but undeniably present. Not animal tracks these spoke of. Intent, of purpose. "Bandits?" she whispered, her stomach clenching. Grayson offered a curt nod. "They're back, and I doubt they've come for a friendly chat." He moved with swift precision, gathering their few possessions. The hearth's warmth seemed a distant memory, as icy trepidation seeped into Annabelle's bones. Fumbling with her satchel strap, the prior vulnerability returned, this time seasoned with sharp terror. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice wavering despite her best efforts. Grayson's eyes darted around the room, calculating their options. "We ride. Now. They'll anticipate us holing up, waiting out the squall. We'll exploit that." He led her to the rear of the saloon, where a dilapidated stable offered meager protection. Their horses, Duke and Belle, were high-strung. Sensing the looming threat, as Grayson saddled Duke, Annabelle noticed a discarded cigarette end near the stable door, unlike Grayson's brand. It was a cheap, commercially rolled smoke, Favored by drifters and outlaws. The chilling truth crashed down. They were not simply passing through. They were being stalked. Grayson, she said, her voice tight with urgency. They were here. They were watching. His hands stilled. How do you know? She pointed to the damning evidence. That's not your brand. And it's fresh. Grayson examined it, his jaw hardening into a rigid line. Damn it all. He finished the task with renewed speed. They know we're here. They know we're exposed. So, what now? Annabelle pressed, struggling to keep the panic at bay. She met his gaze, searching for a lifeline. We ride south, towards the Broken Tooth Mountains. There's a narrow canyon there, a natural choke point. We can hold it. Hold it? Against how many? I don't know. But we have surprise on our side. They'll expect us to flee, to vanish into the storm. We'll offer them something different. He handed her a rifle, the weapon feeling substantial. In her numb hands. Can you handle this? Annabelle hesitated. She had fired a rifle, back in Philadelphia, at paper targets. But this bore no resemblance to a game. This was about remaining alive. Yes, she affirmed, her voice gaining strength. I can. Grayson studied her, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Good. Stay close. Do exactly as I instruct, and don't think twice. He swung up onto Duke, and Annabelle mounted Belle, gripping the reins until her knuckles ached. The wind lashed at them, the driven snow stinging her exposed skin. The tempest mirrored the chaos inside her, the fear and adrenaline surging through her. As they steered out of the stable and into the blinding whiteout, Annabelle cast a final glance at the saloon, a fragile shelter swallowed by the vast, pitiless wilderness. It felt like riding into the maw of death. Yet, amidst the raw terror, a nascent resolve bloomed within her. She was no longer the sheltered socialite from Philadelphia. She was a survivor. They rode in silence, broken only by the rhythmic cadence of hooves and the wind's relentless cry. Grayson navigated through the swirling chaos, his intimate knowledge of the land their sole compass. Annabelle's eyes strained, attempting to penetrate the curtain of white, searching for any flicker of movement. After what seemed an eternity, Grayson halted, signaling her to stop. They were at the mouth of the canyon he had described, a constricted passage between towering rock faces. Here, the wind's ferocity lessened slightly, offering a modicum of respite. This is it, Grayson announced, dismounting. We make our stand here. He began gathering rocks, constructing a rough barrier across the entrance. Annabelle joined him, her fingers clumsy with cold. The labor was arduous, the rocks unforgiving, but it occupied her mind, anchoring her to the present. They'll be here soon, Grayson said, his voice taut. We need to prepare. Annabelle nodded, her pulse hammering in her ears. She checked the rifle, ensuring it was primed and ready. The cold steel offered a strange reassurance. Grayson, she whispered, her voice barely cutting through the wind's howl. Why are they pursuing us? What is it they want? He hesitated, his eyes shadowed by anger and a trace of remorse. They want the ranch. They always have. Your uncle refused to yield. Now they imagine you'll be easier prey. And you? She questioned, her voice tinged with anxiety. Are you a target as well? He met her gaze, his eyes intense and unyielding. I accumulated debts in my past. They may be seeking to settle them. The chilling realization resonated. They weren't solely battling for the ranch. They were fighting for their very existence. And she knew with startling clarity, that she was prepared to stand her ground. As the first tenuous rays of dawn sliced through the storm's oppressive gloom, bathing the snow-laden landscape in hues of rose and gold, they materialized. 3 riders, outlined against the lightening horizon, their forms swelling with each heartbeat. The outlaws had returned to claim their prize. Sacrifice and deception, a feral wind shrieked through the canyon, clawing at their garments, as Grayson grappled with his better judgment. Snow, dense as eiderdown, clung to his beard, blurring his features, yet sharpening his purpose. "You have to stay put, Annabelle," he bellowed against the tempest, his voice raspy. "This narrow gorge provides shelter. I'll lead them away." Annabelle, face bleached but resolute, remained rooted. The gale had spun her tresses into a chaotic halo, yet her gaze burned with an unyielding intensity that defied her fear. "Not a chance, Grayson. We're in this together, come what may. This isn't a parlor game. Annabelle, these men aren't here for polite conversation. They thirst for vengeance, and mine above all. I won't let you be caught in the crossfire." He reached, meaning to usher her deeper into the rocky alcove, but she resisted. "And I won't stand idly by while you ride to your doom. Besides," she added, a fleeting smile gracing her lips, "perhaps I'm not as defenseless as you assume." From her coat, she produced the derringer her uncle had insisted she master before their departure from Philadelphia. The diminutive pistol looked almost toy-like in her gloved hand, but the steely glint in her eyes spoke volumes. Grayson swore under his breath, knowing argument was futile. That stubborn set to her jaw was unmistakable. "Fine, but you obey my every command. This isn't up for discussion. This is about survival." He began to lay out a stratagem, his tone low and urgent, scratching diagrams in the snow with his rifle stock. Annabelle listened with unwavering focus, her initial trepidation melting into a steely resolve. While lacking expertise in the arts of tracking or gunplay, she possessed a different kind of acuity, a strategic intellect honed in the opulent salons of high society. Now, that intellect was trained on outmaneuvering their pursuers. "They believe they've trapped us, that we're easy pickings," Annabelle stated, her words scarcely audible above the wind's lament. "Let's turn that expectation against them." She gestured toward a slender precipice that traced the canyon wall, partially veiled by the swirling snow. "I can ascend there. From that vantage, I could trigger a landslide." Grayson weighed her words. The ledge was precarious, and the ascent fraught with peril under these conditions. A single misstep would send her spiraling into the abyss. But her concept held promise. A precisely timed avalanche could effectively seal off the outlaws within the canyon, severing their retreat and granting them a chance at survival. Too risky. No riskier than waiting to be slaughtered. I wager those wolves aren't anticipating an avalanche. She met his gaze, her determination rock solid. "You demanded I listen. Then hear this. I'm going up there, Grayson. Either assist me or watch me do it myself." Grayson muttered another curse, yet this time a grudging admiration colored his tone. "Oh, right, damn it. But you follow my instructions to the letter. No grandstanding, no improvisations. Understood?" Annabelle nodded, her focus locked on the treacherous climb. He demonstrated the precise placement of her feet, testing each hold before trusting it to her grasp. The wind bayed like some mythical beast, threatening to wrench her from the stone, yet she persevered, her movements surprisingly lithe. Grayson observed her ascent, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knew his attention should be focused on fortifications, but his eyes remained fixed on her, a tight knot of dread forming in his stomach. Upon reaching the ledge, Annabelle secured herself as best she could against the elements. The wind lashed at her, and the snow pricked her skin, but she held firm. Scanning the canyon below, she detected no sign of their hunters. Not yet, but she knew their arrival was imminent. She sensed it in the very air, a palpable foreboding that saturated the storm. Grayson, positioned below, signaled to her. He indicated a collection of loose stones teetering at the edge of the precipice, marking her target. Annabelle nodded, her gloved hands tightening around a large, jagged rock. She waited, her breath catching in her chest. The silence stretched taut, broken only by the ceaseless roar of the wind. Then she heard it, the faint cadence of approaching hooves, muted by the snow. They were closing in. Taking a deep breath, Annabelle prepared herself. As the lead riders rounded the bend in the canyon, she hurled the boulder over the edge. It plunged earthward, initiating a cascade of rock and snow. The outlaws, entirely unprepared, scrambled for shelter as the avalanche thundered through the gorge. Below, Grayson unleashed a fusillade of gunfire, targeting riders struggling to control their spooked mounts. The canyon resonated with the echoes of gunfire and the cries of men and beasts. Annabelle relentlessly dislodged more rock, creating a deathly screen of debris. The assault was chaotic, brutal, and devastatingly effective. The outlaws, disoriented and trapped, proved unable to organize a response. Some were crushed beneath the cascading stones, others were unhorsed and trampled. As the initial wave waned, Annabelle chanced a glance over the edge. The canyon floor was a pandemonium of violence. Horses lay in their death throes, men writhed in agony, and the atmosphere was thick with the acrid tang of gunpowder and blood. But the ordeal was far from over. A figure materialized from the maelstrom, brushing snow from his long coat. A cadaverous man with eyes like chipped ice. Jedediah Crow. He raised his rifle, his gaze locking onto the ledge where Annabelle stood exposed. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. He had seen her. He knew who was responsible for the landslide. Grayson, realizing the peril, shouted a warning. But his outcry came too late. Crow fired. The projectile whistled past Annabelle's ear, missing her by mere inches. She ducked, desperately seeking refuge behind a larger boulder. The ledge was no longer a sanctuary. She had to descend. Now. But as she turned to retreat, her blood turned glacial. One of the outlaws, seemingly impervious to the surrounding carnage, was scaling the canyon wall directly toward her. He moved with unnerving speed and agility, his eyes ablaze with a feverish light. He intended to kill her. With a chilling certainty, Annabelle knew her time was running out. She had a single chance, a desperate ploy to survive. She swept her gaze over the bedlam below, then back to the encroaching outlaw. And a plan, audacious and harrowing, began to crystallize in her mind. A plan that would demand her ultimate sacrifice. Showdown at the ranch, a frigid gale keened a desolate lament as Annabelle clung to the precipice. Jedediah Crow's cruel smirk a jarring note against the tempestuous white. "End of the line, sweetheart," he grated, his words swallowed by the wind's fury. From below, his accomplice scrabbled up the treacherous incline, eyes gleaming with avarice. Annabelle understood. Her desperate gamble was the only thing separating them from a fate too grim to contemplate. Drawing a shallow breath, she centered herself, focusing on the unstable rockfall perched above. "Appreciating the scenery, gentlemen," she called, her tone surprisingly unwavering. Crow's smirk deepened. "Just admiring your spirit." He plainly thought her bluffing, Annabelle countered with a thin, defiant smile. Spirit and a touch of ingenuity. With a fluid, practiced movement, she freed the linchpin stone. The mountain roared as the precarious assembly of boulders and ice thundered down the slope, a miniature avalanche of destruction. The climbing outlaw shrieked, consumed by the cascading debris. Crow bellowed in rage, clawing for purchase as the ledge shuddered. Annabelle wasted no time. Adrenaline surging, she scrambled back along the narrow path. Time bought, though a pittance, was still time earned. The ranch was sanctuary, their last hope. Emerging from the cover of a rocky outcropping, Grayson moved with purpose, long strides shortening the distance between them. "Annabelle, you all right?" "Let's just say I've rearranged the landscape," she retorted, urgency tightening her voice. "We need to ride, now. They'll be coming." They spurred their horses onward, the blizzard a relentless pursuer, testing the animals' endurance. In the distance, the ranch materialized like a mirage, the familiar outline of the house, a promise of safety. But even from afar, Annabelle discerned the dark shapes patrolling the corral. Black Bart had arrived. "They're already there," Grayson observed, his hand instinctively drifting toward the rifle slung across his back. "I know," Annabelle affirmed, a hard light in her eyes. "But they don't know what's in store for them." Dismounting in a secluded hollow, they left the horses concealed from view. Annabelle took the lead, moving with a newfound resolve that bordered on startling. The privileged debutante had vanished, replaced by a woman tempered in the crucible of adversity. "Remember the plan?" she breathed. Grayson nodded, his gaze unwavering. Diversion, then ambush. Reaching a property line, her pulse hammered in her chest. The outlaws lounged around the main house, their faces reflecting boredom and avarice. Black Bart stood on the porch, a cigar jutting from his lips, surveying his prize with predatory eyes. Taking a steadying breath, Annabelle stepped into the open. "Expecting someone, gentlemen?" she announced, her voice carrying with unexpected authority. Black Bart's head snapped up, surprise widening his eyes. Well, he drawled, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "Whoa, if it ain't the little bird flown back to the cage." "Come to beg for mercy?" "Far from it," Annabelle retorted, her hand hovering near the release of the irrigation system she and Grayson had prepared earlier. "I've simply come to offer you a change of scenery." With a swift, decisive action, she pulled the lever. The parched earth erupted in a violent surge of icy water, transforming the dusty yard into a muddy quagmire. The outlaws roared in startled outrage, scrambling for solid footing. Grayson's signal. He burst from the barn, rifle blazing, dropping two adversaries before they could react. Surprise granted them the initial edge, but Annabelle knew its power was fleeting. The remaining outlaws returned fire, bullets whizzing past Annabelle's ear. She sought cover behind a big water trough, retrieving a rifle stashed there earlier. Though not as skilled as Grayson, she could defend herself. The battle raged, a cacophonous ballet of gunfire and desperation. Annabelle moved with surprising grace, exploiting the environment, eliminating targets one by one. Grayson was a force of lethal precision, each shot finding its mark. Black Bart watched the chaos unfold, his face twisting with unadulterated fury. Raising his own rifle, he locked his sights on Annabelle. "You'll regret this, you meddling fool," he bellowed. Before he could fire, Grayson launched himself at Bart, tackling him to the ground in a flurry of limbs and mud. They wrestled for control, a desperate struggle for dominance. Annabelle knew intervention was critical. She charged toward the fray, dodging incoming fire, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. She reached the struggling men as Black Bart managed to wrench his weapon free. He aimed it at Grayson's head. With a cry, Annabelle threw herself between them, intercepting the shot. The bullet tore through her shoulder, unleashing a searing wave of agony. She gasped, stumbling backwards. Grayson roared, a guttural sound of primal rage and desperation. He surged to his feet, seizing Black Bart's wrist and twisting with savage force. The gun clattered to the ground. With a swift, decisive strike, Grayson delivered a crushing blow to Black Bart's jaw, rendering him unconscious. The remaining outlaws, witnessing their leader's defeat, faltered. They scattered, melting into the blizzard, their dreams of plunder lost in the swirling white abyss. Grayson knelt beside Annabelle, his face etched with profound concern. "Annabelle, are you hurt badly?" "Just a graze," she lied, forcing a smile, the pain a sharp, insistent presence. "Finish it." Grayson hesitated, his eyes clouded with worry. "I can't leave you here." "You must," Annabelle insisted, her voice weak but firm. "They'll regroup if you don't. This ends now." Grayson nodded, his jaw clenched with resolution. He retrieved his rifle and vanished into the storm, leaving Annabelle alone in the ravaged yard. She watched him go, her heart a complex mix of fear and trust. He would do what needed to be done. He always did. As the snow fell, shrouding the fallen in a pristine blanket, Annabelle leaned against the porch, her strength draining away. She had stared death in the face and survived. She had defended her home and her autonomy. She had discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. When Grayson returned hours later, the blizzard had lifted, revealing a world reborn in immaculate white. He dismounted and rushed to her side, his eyes flooding with relief. "It's over," he announced, his voice roughened with fatigue. "They won't be back." Annabelle smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression lighting her face. "I know," she whispered. "We prevailed." The bitter reek of spent powder clung to the air, sharpened by the metallic tang of spilled blood. Sunlight, splintered by the rough-hewn gaps in the ranch house walls, painted dancing mosaics on the dusty floor. Annabelle lay on a cot, her shoulder bound tight. A dull throb competed with the hushed voices drifting from outside. Her eyelids flickered. Grayson was there, his face carved with anxiety, his hand feather light as he brushed a stray curl from her brow. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice gravelly with concern. "Don't push yourself." "Grayson," she croaked, her throat raw. "Are they gone?" He nodded, a hard satisfaction flickering across his features. "Crow and his rabble are finished. Bart won't be causing trouble to anyone, ever." He offered no further explanation, and Annabelle didn't ask for one. She understood the price this land demanded, a ruthless streak she was slowly, reluctantly, acknowledging was necessary for survival. "You shouldn't have," she managed, her eyes finding his. "You shouldn't have risked everything." His jaw clenched. "You think I'd stand by and watch you get hurt?" The unspoken filled the air, a silent declaration echoing between them. He looked away, fussing with the blanket. Outside, the ranch hands began clearing the debris, their activity a low hum of reassurance. The immediate danger had passed, but the memory of what they had endured lingered like a phantom. As dusk bled across the sky later, painting the horizon in shades of fire and plum, Annabelle sat on the porch, swathed in a thick shawl. Grayson leaned against a post beside her, his gaze sweeping over the vast terrain. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she murmured, following his line of sight. He grunted agreement. "Aye, but unforgiving." gives nothing freely. A ghost of a smile touched Annabelle's lips. I've learned that firsthand. She paused, inhaling deeply. I've been thinking about my future. Grayson turned, his eyes questioning. And I'm staying, she stated, her voice resolute. I'm staying here, Grayson. This is my home now. Surprise flashed across his face, quickly masked by a cautious reserve. You sure about that, Annabelle? This ain't Philadelphia. This is a tough existence. I know, she replied, meeting his eyes squarely. But it's a genuine life, and I want it. I want this land, I want this life, and, she added, her voice softening, I want you. The air hummed with unspoken longing, heavy with shared experience and the fragile seed of hope. Grayson reached out, his hand enveloping hers. His touch, calloused and firm, held a surprising tenderness. I don't know what to say, he admitted, his voice rough. Never figured I'd find someone like you out here. Someone like me? She teased, a playful spark in her eyes. A pampered city girl? A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. Something like that. But that's not you anymore, is it? No, she affirmed, squeezing his hand. It's not. The following weeks became a whirlwind of lessons. Despite her still tender shoulder, Annabelle threw herself into mastering the intricacies of ranch life. She learned to ride with confidence, to mend fences with skill, to care for the livestock with compassion. She even, with Grayson's steadfast guidance, learned to handle a rifle. The days were far from easy, and moments of doubt visited her. A yearning for the familiar comforts of her former life. But she pushed forward, fueled by a blossoming sense of purpose and the unwavering encouragement of the man at her side. Grayson, in response, slowly chipped away at the wall of stoicism that had been his shield for years. He revealed stories of his past, the hardships he had overcome, the dreams he had buried. He taught her the language of the land, its rhythms and secrets. He showed her how to survive, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Their days were etched with grueling work, but their evenings were filled with quiet, intimate moments. They would linger on the porch, watching constellations bloom across the inky sky, sharing tales and whispered aspirations. Hours melted away as they explored each other's histories, exposing vulnerabilities and nurturing the fragile shoots of hope. One night, bathed in the warm glow of the hearth fire, Annabelle turned to Grayson, her eyes luminous with affection. You know, she began, I never imagined finding love in a place like this. Grayson smiled, a genuine, heart-stopping smile that transformed his rugged features. Me neither. Guess life likes to throw curveballs. He reached out, framing her face with his hands. I love you, Annabelle, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. More than I ever thought possible. I love you too, Grayson, she whispered, her voice trembling. More than words can express. He leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was at once tender and fiercely passionate. It was a kiss that cemented their bond, a vow of a shared future built on trust, affection, and an unwavering commitment to this untamed land. The next spring, they stood beneath an arch woven with wildflowers, exchanging vows before a small circle of friends and neighbors. Annabelle donned a simple white dress, wildflowers gracing her hair. Grayson wore his best shirt and a heart-stoppingly nervous grin. As they exchanged rings, their eyes met, reflecting a profound understanding, a connection that transcended their disparate pasts. They had discovered a love as rugged and enduring as the land itself. Life on the ranch never became easy. Challenges still arose. Hardships tested their resolve. But they confronted them together, side by side, their love a constant beacon of strength. They expanded the ranch, coaxing life from the dry earth and growing their herds. They established a schoolhouse for the local children, ensuring access to education. They evolved into cornerstones of the community, respected for their tireless dedication, their generosity, and their staunch commitment to the spirit of the West. Years spun by, weaving silver threads into Annabelle's hair and etching deeper lines on Grayson's face, their love only deepening with each passing season. They raised a family, instilling in their children the values that had anchored their own lives: honor, integrity, and a profound reverence for the land. As they rested on the porch of their ranch house, watching the fiery hues of the sunset paint the horizon, they knew they had created a life richer and more profound than either could have envisioned. They had found their salvation in the West, not just individually, but together. They had forged a legacy that would resonate for generations, a testament to the enduring power of love, resilience, and the unwavering spirit of the human heart. Their story transformed into fireside lore, a tale of an Eastern lady and a Western cowboy who discovered love in the most improbable setting, proving that even in the wildest of frontiers, a new dawn was always within reach.